It will be possible to make them pay. I think it's most important that they should be made to pay. I think that there can be no satisfactory future for the railways unless they are made to pay.
Beeching inherited an industry that had barely developed since the 1900s. He now faced an enormous challenge to correct more than a century of inefficiency ingrained in the network from its very start. The system had evolved without a plan, built by railway barons, whose overriding concern was making a quick buck. Even if that meant duplicating lines or constructing routes that were unsustainable in the long term. Public service was usually the last thing on their minds. Trains were designed for profit. Passenger travel had been a luxury, but then the general public fell in love with trains too. They wanted to travel on them as well. And an Act of Parliament in 1844 duly forced companies to offer cheap fares for all.
Every company had to provide a service on every line that would cost no more than an old penny a mile and run at least at 12 miles an hour. Now, some of them were a bit naughty and they'd run their trains at 6 o'clock in the morning and they were pretty unpopular. But most of them took advantage of this and it opened up the railways to the masses.
This is when the British love affair with the train really began. Rail travel was now seen as a democratic, even God-given right, and it was enshrined in law. All very noble, but the stark economic truth was that moving people around the country was secondary to the real business of rail.
This is what the railways were originally about, from raw materials like coal or iron ore to manufactured goods and livestock. What the railways were designed to do first was carry freight. Trains literally drove the Industrial Revolution. And the prospect of thousands of freight wagons, full to bursting, travelling up and down the country, that's what excited the early railway entrepreneurs. That's where the money was.
By the early 1850s, there was an astonishing 5,000 miles of railway crisscrossing the country, owned by dozens of companies, and this hectic growth showed no signs of stopping. A century before Dr. Beeching, some people thought the unchecked expansion of the railways would end in disaster.
Railways have set all the towns of Britain a-dancing. Reading is coming up to London, Basingstoke is going down to Gosport or Southampton, confusedly waltzing in a state of progressive dissolution, and know not where the end of the death dance will be for them.
It wasn't just Carlisle who had an apocalyptic view of the railways. Although they later came to define the British landscape, for many 19th century NIMBYs, trains signalled the death of the countryside.
This line through the Severn Valley is now a popular tourist attraction. But in 1849, when plans were drawn up, there were local objections. One landowner, Mr. Thomas Charlton Whitmore of Apley Park, insisted that the railway enter a tunnel when it went through his estate so that the view from his house would be preserved. A sizable offer of compensation from the railways changed his mind, and in a stunning volte-face, he then started cutting down trees so he would get a better view of passing trains.
Railways, though rooted in the world of money and commerce, were fast becoming works of art in their own right.
Railways were considered not just one of the highest forms of modern technology, but they were part of a new shaping of the British landscape. You can see the sheer thrill and enjoyment that architects had in designing stations. They could let rip. They designed buildings that were a combination of Greek temples mixed with railways. They could be Gothic cathedrals. They could be fortresses. And they were most magnificent, thrilling, exciting things.
This chaotic commercial venture had become part and parcel of the way Victorians imagined themselves. and still influences how we see ourselves as Britons today. And as the extent and popularity of trains grew, rail travel even became the subject of an etiquette guide, one that's still pretty useful now.
The placing of a coat, a book, a newspaper, or any other article on the seat of a carriage is intended as a token that such a place is engaged. To prevent the vibration of the carriages to the arms and book, do not rest the elbows but hold the book or paper in both hands and support it by muscular power. Keep a sharp lookout to prevent being carried beyond your station. The guards sometimes call out the name, but in such curious and varied dialect that it is next to impossible to gather their meaning.
By the start of the 20th century, a country only 600 miles long had 18,500 miles of railway. With such a huge profusion of different companies and lines, the system was complicated, almost beyond comprehension. But miraculously, it all worked.
If Dr. Beeching had been compiling his report in the early 1900s, he'd have found the railways in fine form. Most lines were delivering a greater profit than ever before or since, especially on the long-distance routes. Companies were actually investing in freight services and in passenger trains, putting in better seating, lighting, toilets, all designed to deliver the enjoyable travelling experience.
The golden age of Britain's railways was somewhere between 1890 and the outbreak of the First World War. That's when the railways are at their greatest extent physically. That's where they've got the greatest amount of fresh, interesting, intelligent talent. They've been going long enough to have a routine and a rhythm to themselves. And they look absolutely sensationally wonderful in every way.
Oh, Mr. Porter, what shall I do? I want to go to Birmingham and they're taking me on to crew. Send me back tonight.
The democratic idea of a national railway expanded immensely during the Edwardian era.
Silly girl I am.
From upper-class day trips to the city to working-class excursions to the seaside, the way to go was by rail.
Keep your hair on, Mary Ann, and mind that you don't bust. Some old gentleman inside.
People's passion for train travel continued well into the 20th century, stoked by advertisements for the alluring places you could escape to by train. Meanwhile, newsreels extolled the excellence of British locomotive engineering.
The Silver Jubilee Express, the new streamlined train, makes a trial run before starting on the regular service between London and Newcastle and attains the amazing speed of 112 miles per hour. It remains so steady that one can read without any difficulty. The Silver Jubilee is playing its part in keeping up the prestige of British railways.
Throughout the 1930s, British steam trains were smashing international records. It looked wonderful, it looked like progress, but sadly, it was exactly the opposite. While we were still in love with steam, other countries were already heavily investing in really modern technologies, like high-speed diesel and electric traction. The great days of Britain's railways were already over. A less glamorous rival was now challenging the train company's monopoly on delivering goods. The lorry. And the railways couldn't even fight back because of government legislation.
It was very difficult for them to charge flexible prices. They couldn't turn down traffic so long as they could physically carry it. And it was very easy for the road haulage operator to see what the railways would charge and undercut them.